Hello and welcome, everyone. My name is Mike McMahon. I'm the Executive Director of the Hymn Society in the United States and Canada. And today I have the joy of speaking with Randall Sensmeier, who is going to be our guest today. Uh, Randy is the Editor Emeritus at GIA Publications, where he developed and edited hymn texts and tunes. We have a list of some of the authors he's worked with over the years, and they include Sylvia Dunstan, Ruth Duck, Herman Stuempfle, Sally Ann Morris, Delores Dufner, Mary Louise Bringle, John Dalles, Adam Tice, uh, David Gambrell, Dave Bjorlin, John Bell, and I'm sure there are a bunch more too. These are names that we've come to know over the years, and Randy has been the one working with them to get their works to publication. In addition to that, Randy's a church musician. He spent 51 years as a parish church musician, and now is retired from that as well, living in Southern California. So, Randy, it's really great to be with you. Thanks for being with us today.
Thank you for having me, Mike. I'm glad to be here, and I
We have,
welcome hello to everybody listening. I haven't been able to see many of you. I haven't been able to come to the last two conferences. I hope to get there again. We'll see. Thank you.
yeah, we hope that too. Yeah, a bunch of people are saying hello, and they're glad to see you too. I wonder if we could just kind of start at the beginning, like would start to try to talk a little bit about your own background and your growing up, your family life, schooling, church. Like what is it that got you interested in music and ministry, church music particularly?
Well, I grew up in the Lutheran Church in a small farming community in southern Indiana. And my family were regular churchgoers, and I was a student in Lutheran elementary school where we sang every day. And so that was part of my background. I can't say that our corpus of hymnody was all that great, but nevertheless, we did sing. And I there was the principal of the school and his wife, who was the organist of the parish, were people I admired because of what they were able to help people do. And so I decided to follow sort of their path, and I went to Concordia Teachers College in River Forest, Illinois. Now, in those days, it was called Teachers College because if you graduated, you were expected to become a teacher in the Lutheran school system. And so actually, if you studied music, you sort of did it on the side. And mostly it was about theology, education, and so on. And so that was my beginning there. And then I spent 2 years as an intern in a Lutheran parish. I had met my wonderful wife when I was we eloped when I was a senior and she was a sophomore. And of course, those things never last. We just observed our 56th anniversary. So I'm very blessed that way. After that, those 2 years, I went to another 2 years to another Lutheran parish, which was one of those pillar parishes. And not wishing to depart this earth at an early age, I departed that. Went to another parish on the south side of Chicago, which was a blessing because that was the first of the pastors I had who loved hymnody and church music. And of course, as you know, that's one extraordinarily encouraging thing for a church musician. And there I went through the development of what happened in the Lutheran Church anyway, with the uh, uh, publication of the Worship Supplement and the Lutheran Book of Worship, where the corpus of hymnody expanded, and we were able to broaden our horizons. And during that time, I also did a master's in church music at Concordia, by then university. After 17 years there, I was a bit burned out.
If I could just stop for a second, Randy, I want to stay at the beginning for a little while before we move too much further. Like,
Okay.
did your family were you a singing family?
In church, mostly. Most of the time, we were just too busy working
Uh-huh.
because there was a lot of manual labor in my early years. It was a very modest circumstance. It's a two-bedroom, one-bath farmhouse with a family of six.
Uh-huh. So you
And
grew
so my
up,
experience was with an outhouse and a crank telephone. So went back that early. So,
wow.
but
So you grew up on a farm.
nevertheless, yeah, but nevertheless, we did go to church regularly and sing.
Hmm. Cool. And did you get involved in church music like in as a school student? Were like in the choir or
Yes.
studying the organ to play
No,
service?
well, I began piano about the age of 8, and I began studying the organ in high school.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, and that church organist I told you about soon handed me off to actually a college professor who was very interesting. I remember sitting in her living room. She had a harpsichord, and an antique harpsichord, and the plectra were turkey quills. So she would play, and her husband would carve turkey quills.
Wow.
But she was a wonderful teacher who expanded my horizons greatly. But again, the emphasis there, unfortunately, was not so much on congregational song as it was on performance,
Hmm.
keyboard performance. And my immersion in parish ministry sort of turned my attention elsewhere.
You were at Concordia. You went on and did the master's degree. You were just saying. So you came across some of the heavy hitters in church music of the 20th century, right? Did you have Richard Hillard or Carl Schall?
Yes, absolutely. I studied with both of those, church music with Carl. And in fact, it's interesting, later on, I became the editor of all his collections and then studied composition with Richard Hillard.
Uh-huh.
And I told you, so I had a very good foundation. The one thing about the Lutheran education was it gave me a very solid foundation in many ways. I had some wonderful teachers of theology too, and because a lot of the coursework was theology. Because in those days, the Lutheran school teachers were sort of second-hand pastors, if you will,
Hmm.
teaching religion every day and so on.
And you came along really at a time when there was a lot of change that was beginning to develop in the liturgy and with church music, right? So you were sort of part of that early pioneering effort to revolutionize congregational singing in the churches.
Yes, absolutely. And it was quite a revelation. It just felt like a breath of fresh air. As the Lutheran hymnal had been used for so long and was so dead, and all of a sudden we got all this new material that enlivened congregational worship.
Yeah, so you were that was before the green hymnals, I guess. Huh? Yeah.
Yes. Well, actually, when there was something called the worship supplement that was began that a small volume, and then there was the Lutheran Book of Worship in 1978.
Right. And you said you had a couple of parish experiences that really that helped to form your thinking about all these things.
Well, yeah, that parish was a wonderful place. My children were able to go to the school there, and it was fine. And after 17 years, I was tired of a bit of a grind as a teacher there. I would teach all day, direct 4 choirs, play for 5 liturgies a week, drive the school bus, and occasionally referee athletic contests. So
Wow.
I was ready for something else. So in 1990, I was fortunate. At Concordia, they had an annual event called the Lectures in Church Music, and it was there that I met Bob Battistini. And as you know, he's wonderfully ecumenical. And so I thought, well, this is something a Catholic wandering into these unfriendly territories. And of course, I got to know him a bit, and uh, at the point where I needed something new, actually, I was invited to come on to GIA as a half-time editor. And then I was also half-time in another wonderful parish, Ascension Lutheran, Riverside, Illinois. My predecessor there was someone you might know, Paul Westermeyer. And
Yes.
so they already had a good tradition of hymnody. And so I inherited that, and it was a wonderful place also.
Oh. And editing really is something that you're probably best known for in terms of your impact on hymnody. And I wonder if you'd say a word about like working with these various people. Like, what kind of process did you use to work with them and bring their material to publication?
Well, first of all, let me say what a privilege it was to work with them. You can't imagine how it felt to receive, often by email, sometimes by snail mail, their offerings and say, "Oh my gosh, look at that. What a wonderful a bit of creativity that is." And to see the thought and the work and the enterprise that went behind it. Well, the process is very interesting. Let's say um, I got a number of texts. Sometimes it was maybe 50, sometimes more than that. Generally, the collections I settled on was a number from 50 to 75, and then the quest was to find those that were most worthy of publication. And sometimes that involved a convincing the authors or composers that maybe they just didn't want to see this in print. and and so that would happen. And after that, then the puzzle began, um, especially with text authors. The puzzle was finding tunes to go with the text if they hadn't already identified some. So in the old days, I didn't have hymnary. So I would be at a big, giant conference table with every hymnal I could find scattered, looking for hymns, and then slotting them in, and usually obviously according to the meter, and finding some that worked. I'm pleased that some of my choices have endured, some of them hadn't. That's fine. But the idea was to get them into print, to give them some kind of vocation. That was always the case, for me, was to give them an opportunity to find their way in the corpus of hymnody. And of course, as we know, uh, the people will speak in terms of how they're going to be used and how well they endure. And so that began to happen after a while. But of course, when that process was done, and sometimes it meant shuffling around the tunes because I used a tune too many times, or I wanted this for another text, and so on. So it was like a puzzle, crossword puzzle. When that was finished, of course, there were the nuts and bolts. You got to obtain permissions for anything that was under copyright. Then there were all the indices which had to be created. Some kind of format needed to be developed. Usually the text authors would do scriptural and liturgical use and topical uses, which was very helpful. And so that would happen. And I would have to have to get a biographical sketch and solicit some kind of forward from them as well. And then finally, that all came together and was put together. And then, of course, the proofreading, which, as you know, is full of snags sometimes. One can proofread very well. And at GIA, nobody ever really wanted to see a new edition as it came off the press because you know what you were going to find, a mistake.
Mhm.
and and so, but for the most part, it worked out very well. And I did tally through the years. Um, I was involved in 34 single author or composer collections, as well as 2 anthologies.
Wow, that's amazing.
Uh,
I wonder if you could say a word about working with different authors because I think editors have the challenge of and the privilege really of helping somebody bring something to print, and you have sometimes some obstacles to work through as you go along the way. But when Adam Tice wrote the piece about you that when you were nominated to be a fellow, he specifically mentioned how you carefully and skillfully you worked with authors to help them do their best work. So I wonder if you could just say a word about that.
well, I'd say my experience was varied. Most people were very good to work with. I think they were interested in making their work as good as it could be. Some were a little bit more prickly than others. Others were more open to comment. Some of them I had to work with more than others, just to help them on their way to being better authors.
Mhm.
And I'm grateful that they were willing to listen to that. It seemed like I had been given a gift to recognize good texts and good tunes for my background, and that was very helpful too. One of my mantras is life's too short to sing bad hymns.
Well, that's certainly true.
And I try very hard not to do that. And,
Uh,
and so I think that, those experiences were, as I said, varied, but mostly very productive. Um, some people are very, very careful. Others need a little bit more proofreading and copy editing and so on. Making suggestions about various facets of the hymn writing task. But it was mostly pretty good. It was one interesting anecdote. I know I should tell this with maybe some hesitation. Was uh, one of the collections I worked with was Sister Delores Dufner. She looked at me and said, "I want this collection to be perfect." And when a Benedictine nun looks you in the eye and says she wants something perfect, it even scared this Lutheran to death. So, and of course, what she sent me was usually not, it was mostly perfect. So,
Right. She's very meticulous, right?
yes,
But
exactly.
but your job is to be more meticulous than everybody, right?
Well, I tried. It was something that I had help with. There'd be another proofreader at GIA, and so that was good. And so I appreciated that. But yeah, mostly meticulous in terms of looking at the whole hymn, the whole text, or the whole tune. Because my approach was that, as I told you earlier, we don't need any more generic Protestant hymns. So there had to be something there that stirred something inside me. It had to have something to say. It had to have something to express the gospel in our time that was cogent and urgent. And so that was one of my criteria. And thankfully, I was able to find enough texts that did do that, enough people who wanted to do that kind of thing, because we need that sort of thing in our day. And what is appropriate and necessary in our day may change, but many of those texts were so wonderful because they did that exactly.
Mhm.
One thing I did mention in that little puzzle about putting together texts and tunes was that everything went well for a while. And then all of a sudden, people like Adam Tice went off the rails and started using weird meters. So then not only the problem was finding tunes, it was finding someone to create tunes for those meters. And of course, that helped by, bringing forth new talent who would compose. One other thing I must mention is that I have to give a great deal of credit to Bob Battistini, who was a very strong proponent of hymnody and very encouraging in that way. And I also would like to say that I give a lot of credit to my successor, Adam Tice, because back in the day when I was doing these things, I saw many texts from people where there might be three or four that were okay, and the rest maybe not so much. Never enough to have a critical mass to produce a collection. But now Adam has created something called Soundboard, where these individual texts and tunes can be published, can be made available. And that's been a great improvement.
The title Unbound.
I'm sorry, Unbound. See,
Yeah.
Unbound, yeah.
And
Thank you.
Adam also was responding to your comment about him going off the rails, and he just wanted to say, "You're welcome." So,
Well, I must say, Adam is listening. One of the early things I said to him, you talked about advice to text writers, is, as you know, Adam's a Mennonite. And so one of their big things is peace, pacifism. And I told him, Adam, if you want other people besides Mennonites to sing your hymns, you need to expand beyond pacifism, which he gloriously has done.
Indeed, he
Although he
has.
still gives due deference to that as well.
Right. Indeed, indeed. Um, Eddie, you had mentioned that you had a good relationship with Herman Stuempfle, and I think you mentioned something about meeting him and getting started to work with him. Do you have any memories of working with Herman?
Yeah, well, my first memory of that was Bob Battistini put a bunch of texts on my desk and says, "What do you think of these?" And I read through them and I go, "My gosh, this is all law and gospel. This guy must be a Lutheran." And of course, I found out he was the president of the Lutheran Seminary and a homiletics professor. And that began the start of a long, very, very fruitful relationship. We became very good friends as well. And yeah, he was an amazing person writing all those hymns after he retired. And what I found about him was that his texts were like a little sermon often, and that they reflected his wide. I mean, he was a practicing Christian. He was involved in many things, prison ministry and tutoring young immigrants, all kinds of things like that. And so he had that perspective as well as being a fine scholar. And the other thing I might add, which I think is interesting, is that he was very widely read. And so sometimes his hymn writing would be informed by things other than scripture, which I think is appropriate as we live in a pluralistic society. We live in an environment where perhaps we should come to appreciate those things. Not all wisdom is encapsulated in the Bible. And he would use that as a springboard for sometimes for his text sometimes. But he was a wonderful person and actually a bit of a mystic, I think. He would never say that. But just from his text, one could see that everything in his mind was not just black and white in terms of his faith or his direction in life. And I think that lent a certain mystery to his texts also.
Yeah, did it ever make you think about the relationship between preaching and hymn singing? I mean, to have somebody like that who is a professor of homiletics and a hymn writer, um, that did that ever enter into your conversation with him?
Of course it did. As a preacher, I would assume I've only given a few sermons, thank goodness, in my life. And but I think a preacher uh, has has an acute need to influence their audience. And so I think that informs what they do. Whereas a text writer might say, I'm going to produce this text that is about this topic and goes through and provides a framework for that.
Hmm.
But a preacher would say, I want to find a way to reach my audience. I want to find an effective way to do that. And at the same time, obviously, for a preacher to incorporate scripture and so on into it. But I think it's very important that people have that point of view where they are trying to come across with a certain idea. And of course, I've often said that about sermons as well as hymn texts. If a hymn text or a sermon manages to uh, convey one main idea, it's been a success.
Right. And the more ideas that are in there, the less likely that's going to happen.
Well,
Right.
yeah, that's very true. I mean, that is very true. And I think that that was one thing that Herman did very well.
Yeah. Yeah. I wanted to say a little bit about the relationship between text and tune. I know that in addition to being an editor, you're also a composer, and I've certainly used some of your work. So I know you're deeply enmeshed in the relationship between those words and the music that you're writing. We've had some people on who've said, I can't begin to write a tune until I've got a text to work with. And others say, I can't begin to write a text until I've got a tune in my head. And I just wonder if you had any thoughts about all that, how those two elements relate to each other.
Well, I think for me, clearly a memorable melody is very important because if you have, say, a preacher that gets up and speaks in a monotone voice, not much is going to happen. So a memorable melody is very important, but I think it is also essential that it proceeds from the text. And for me, if I see a text that doesn't move me in some way, I can't write a tune to it. It's not possible. It's just not possible. And so usually, if a text is well constructed, a tune almost writes itself
Hmm.
because it has a rhythm, it has a contour that leads to success in terms of writing a tune. And so that I think that's the relationship. Of course, for some of the wonderful hymns we have, we it would be hard to separate text and tune. Uh, the aim of the Lutheran chorale always was, as I was preached many times in classes, is one text was wedded to one tune.
Hmm.
And and so I think there is something to be said for that. Not that obviously I can't have different tunes for a text or something, or different text for a tune, but I think there is something to be said for that distinctive marriage that makes something work.
Thank you for that. I mean, I hear pretty clearly um, your own thinking about the text coming first and then the tune coming from it. We have had someone here, I think particularly Mel Bringle, who almost always composes from a tune, and begins, with that tune in her head before she can write the text. So it's just an interesting way of thinking about it to me. Different people have different ways of relating them.
Well, far be it from me to criticize Mel Bringle's approach, though.
Well, no, it's just fascinating because the month before we had Mel Bringle, we had Alice Parker, who was like the apostle of text first, text first, text first. So it's just fascinating to me to hear different people who obviously receive things differently, so think about the things differently. So, but it's certainly enriching for all of us to have people with those different approaches.
Let me say something about the performance of a hymn, too.
Yeah.
Very frustrating when I see people perform hymns and they haven't really looked for the genius of either the text or the tune. They haven't looked for what it wants to be in that particular place and time and what it in that context, and they haven't made it come alive. And sometimes it takes a little bit of searching to make that happen. But I think there's a way it can happen for almost every hymn, and that is song leaders. I think challenge and mandate to do that. And when that happens, something very special happens. And we know we've all felt it, where you're in an assembly, and all of a sudden, you say, "Oh my gosh, this is special. This is important. This is something that's a little bit transcendent."
Hmm. Cool. What if we switch over to talking a little bit about the Hymn Society? When did you first come to the Hymn Society? What was your first experience?
Well, my first hymn society was 1985. And then after that, none until 1999. I went to the Hymn Society in Vancouver. And the reason I went was because everybody else at GI went to NPM. And so that was the start. And of course, I was hooked after that. And I went every year after that. And so it's been very important for me because I was able to more fully appreciate the hymnody of other denominations than mine and meet all these people who were very enthusiastic and very committed to hymnody.
Uh-huh. Do you have any significant experiences along the way? Yeah.
Um, well, yeah, there were a number of hymn festivals, probably so many significant experiences I can't remember them, in fact. Um, and that's been one of the great blessings of those conferences is there are high moments in every one, and also moments where in sectionals or in plenaries where uh, I some things happened that sort of kindled some ideas in my mind and led to further thought. And really, for me, it was like a graduate school in hymnody.
Very cool. You made lots of contacts along the way. In fact, the list that I read here at the beginning of our time together, I mean, these are all hymn society people. It's amazing how the creation of congregational song in at least in North America has tracked so closely to the life of the hymn society and the connections that people have made with one another there.
Yeah, that's very important. I think that it's a very collegial group. It's a very ecumenical group. And coming from my background at Lutheran Church Missouri Synod was anti-ecumenical. It was something I've come to value and appreciate. And so yeah, that's it's just been a wonderful experience to be part of that. And I'm, as I said earlier, I'm sorry I haven't been able to go along. My mobility is fairly limited now, and so that's an issue.
Yeah.
But I hope to get back to them and experience that once again. Um, my my feeling about the Hymn Society has been every time I go, it's rather like opening a bunch of Christmas presents. I
Mhm.
never know what I'm going to experience, but I
Mhm.
know there are going to be some delightful things. And so that's just by itself makes that something to anticipate eagerly.
Very cool. And of course, your work has been shared at the Hymn Society over the years too, with all the various authors whose works have been part of the festivals and part of our showcases and so forth. So you've had a big impact as well.
Well, yeah, I've just been the sort of the steward of all their work, and uh, and so it's been a great privilege because, as I said earlier, you can't imagine what it's like to, especially with people like Herman Stuempfle. All of a sudden, I get this ring on my computer. Here's another text by Herman. I go, oh my gosh, what is he? Doesn't that guy do anything else? And so,
Well, he was
or
retired.
Adam also. I mean, that's Adam Tice as well. So it's been it seemed like here's a gift to the church that I get to see and do something with.
Yeah, yeah. Did you workshop any of that stuff at your own church? I mean, because you were working in the church and working at GIA. Was there a relationship between what you were doing at your church and what you were doing at GIA?
Almost always.
Mm.
I mean, the pieces that sometimes I didn't just edit hymn texts and tunes at GIA. Did many other things there, and so often many of those things happened in the worship and the parish I was at, so they were quite complementary. I was never more than half time at GIA, and so I spent a lot of time with my parish work, with various choirs and so on, planning liturgy and so on. And so, yeah, those two were related, and I appreciated that complementary nature a great deal. I think it meant a great deal for my work at GIA that I was a practicing church musician because I got an opportunity to try things out and see how they worked.
Was there ever one that like really stood out for you? Something that you had tried out at church that like really popped?
Well, I think I may have mentioned this to you at my church in Riverside, Illinois. One of the members was Martin E. Marty, who's a well-known church historian, a theologian. And when we started to use the hymnal supplement in 1991, I had inserted Marty Haugen's Now the Feast as a liturgy because the Lutheran Church wouldn't allow us to use the official words to the liturgy. And so I put that in there. And we started using it in my church in Riverside. And Marty was rather ecumenical in some ways, but also very solidly straight line Lutheran in other ways, came up to me and said, "Well, that's not the official text, is it?" I said, "No, it's not. It certainly isn't. It's a paraphrase, but I think it works." And well, nothing more was said about that. He kind of walked away. And then a few weeks later, he comes up to me and says, I heard a child walking out of church whistling some of those tunes. I thought, I think it's okay. And so I go, well, that tells you something about how we apprehend new things. Is we need to experience them and give them a little bit of time and let them speak to us. I mean, there have been a number of things like that that I originally probably dismissed a bit. Some of the um, uh, contemporary music from the Catholic Church, for example, that it took me a while to appreciate, or even some hymns that were, something that traditionally were kind of looked down upon in the circles I was raised in and educated in. And eventually I came to, my term for them was they were sanctified by their successful use.
Right. And I think we could all name examples of things people are supposed to not like that people really love anyway, in spite of what the experts are telling them, right?
Yeah, and just because they don't speak to me doesn't mean they don't speak to other people. And that's and when sometimes when they've spoken to other people, it's led me to take another look at them. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe there's something there that I did not see or understand.
I remember a little retreat we had for musicians once, and John Whitfleet was the leader. And he, at one session, he asked everyone to share at their table their one guilty pleasure that they had. It's something in church music that they're supposed to hate that they really loved it. Everybody had something, so it's uh, pretty
I'm,
subjective, right?
I'm reminded of Austin Lovelace's shtick on the circuit where he would have talk about hymns Jesus would not have loved. You ever hear that?
No, I never
Oh
did.
yeah. His favorite was Life is Like a Mountain Railroad. It's an actual hymn. And he would do that in his dry southern accent, and it was hilarious.
That's really great.
Yeah, so that's my one of my pastors said, you know what, one thing I admire about you is that when you play the bad hymns, they sound so good. And I said, well, I wish you wouldn't choose them so often.
Yeah, well, you were doing too good a job then.
I know, which is my, and of course, there's a story about Carl Schock when he was part of the committee that put together a Lutheran book of worship, and he would be the keyboard player for the various tunes and hymns. And so when he didn't like something, he would play it very badly.
Well, there's
I should have learned. I should have learned that lesson.
more than one way to get your way, right? And Tom Strickland was saying that Austin Lovelace also liked the bells of hell go ting-a-ling-a-ling for you and not for me. Uh, do you
Yeah,
know
fortunately I forgot that one. So.
that? Thanks so much, Tom.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, I have not been tempted to look those things up at all. So that's been good. But yeah, he was very good.
And Andrew Donaldson was responding to your story about the child who influenced Martin Marty. And Andrew's comment is a child humming the tune, a beautiful and meaningful observation. And I think that's certainly true.
Yeah, well, Marty was a very keen observer of many things, many very ordinary things. Even though he had a towering intellect, he was very sensitive to the world around him. And so, yeah, he did observe those things, and that was important. Yeah, that's So yeah, hymns. I'm still involved in our little church in San Diego with music now and then, and um, that's been good in my retirement. So,
Hmm.
and I've write a few tunes now and then for various occasions, and I watch with great interest Adam's trajectory as my
Yeah.
successor, and been grateful for it. So,
Well, it's certainly on both sides, it's seeing a someone that I would love to have followed in a job, and someone that I would love to see following in a job. I mean, you're both have made such great contributions, and it's really fun to see you related in that way to one another. So it's great. Well, I think we're just about at the end of our time, and I'd love to just hear answer one more question back to the Hymn Society, and as we look forward, going off into our next 103 years, um, I wonder if there's what might be your fondest hope for the Hymn Society.
well, the last few years have reminded me that what we sing has to be the living voice of the gospel. It has to be uh, something that people will believe when they sing, and something that they will live. They will live what they sing, and that means that our hymnody has to be representative of that. We There's too much at stake for us to, as Christians and as human beings now, that we need to do that wherever we can and whenever we can, even if it may seem in small, insignificant ways. But I think just singing a hymn with a vital message on Sunday morning is an important act. And so, any way the Hymn Society can continue and encourage that is important.
Well, thank you, and thank you for all you've done to sort of push us in that direction through your own work. Adam did write in the chat that he's grateful for your mentoring for this role. I would not be who I am today without Randy's guidance. So it's
Well,
fun.
thank you, Adam. That's very kind.
I think he speaks for all of us who are so grateful for all that you've done to help us to sing as a community. Thank
Well,
you.
thank you. As I said, it's been a privilege.
Well, thanks everybody for being with us, and thanks Randy for being here. Look forward to seeing you next month. Take care, everybody.
Indeed.